Lizzie Borden grabbed an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she'd seen what she had done, she gave her father 41. Hello, and welcome to the HHH podcast, the podcast where we talk about those horrible humans in history. And that is right, today we are going to be talking about Lizzie Borden. So get ready. This story is wild. Be sure you are liking and subscribing to this podcast, and be sure you're sharing it with everyone that you talk to, especially those who love these true crime stories. So, like I said, you haven't guessed, we're talking about Lizzie Borden, and that creepy nursery rhyme is something that the children of the town used to sing at her anytime they saw her. Now, I will say from the very beginning that this is technically an unsolved case, but I am going to let you decide what you think actually happened here. So I'll lay out all the facts and you tell me if you think Lizzie is innocent or not. Because, oh boy, there's a lot of details to this story that we're going to get into. And if you haven't ever heard of Lizzie Borden, oh, get ready for a creepy, creepy tale. Let's dive into this, guys. Lizzie Andrew Borden. Poor girl had a boy middle name. She was named after her father, just so you know. But she was born July 19th, 1860, in Fall River, Massachusetts, to Sarah Anthony Borden. Apparently, that was a common theme to name your daughter after your father. I don't know, strange. And Andrew Jackson Borden. So when Lizzie was 3 years old, her mother actually passed away of a uterine congestion. I don't even know what that is. And spinal disease. Lizzie had two sisters, and both of them were actually older than her. But the second oldest sister didn't make it past her second birthday. Her oldest sister, Emma, Lenora Borden, she actually got a decent lady's middle name, would take it upon herself to be the motherly influence in Lizzie's life. So because she had seen her other little sister pass away and then watched her mother pass away, Emma was felt more responsible for Lizzie and wanted to be the motherly influence for her. But 3 years after their mother had died, their father actually remarried to a woman named Abby Durfee Gray. And neither of these girls really liked this woman and believed that she actually only married their father for the money. But I personally think that Abby actually really did love Andrew Jackson Borden. I think they were actually a good fit, but this wasn't a happy household. Lizzie's father was incredibly wealthy. He was a very, very wealthy man who owned many different businesses and properties. So Lizzie could have actually grown up in a fairly nice home, and technically she did, except her father was a very frugal, or some would call stingy man, who did not like to spend money on things that he didn't see as necessities, things like indoor plumbing or electricity. And those things were just starting to come about. Like, they actually had a little bit of indoor plumbing in their house. They had running water in their cellar and in their barn. And by running water, I mean just like a faucet that brought water into their home. But they didn't have electricity. They didn't have actual toilets or anything in their home. They still had to use an outhouse. So they could have afforded those kinds of things because those were new on the scene. But he didn't see them as necessary. So he never bought those kinds of luxuries for the home. And Lizzie was super bothered by the fact that he was unwilling to spend money on those things. And I'm not going to lie, if I knew about indoor plumbing and electricity and didn't have it, I would be slightly bothered too. Like, I couldn't have lived back then without having electricity and indoor plumbing. That, I think, has been the greatest invention of all time, but I digress. Anyways, they did have a maid named Bridget Sullivan, who they called Maggie. Maggie was a 25-year-old live-in maid who had actually immigrated from Ireland. And important side note here, I'm going to do a lot of side notes in this episode, but important side note, at this time in history, Irish immigrants were severely looked down upon. And I think I've mentioned this before in other episodes, but the upper class especially looked down on Irish people. I don't know why. I really don't. Probably the same reason that they look down on Black people or whatever. There's no logical reason that this happened. They were seen as less than human and treated slightly. And when I say slightly, I mean very, very slightly better than the Black slaves. And Lizzie was one of those people who looked down on Irish people. And that knowledge is important later when it comes to the investigation, because it was an all-Irish police force that was investigating her trial. So she didn't think she got a fair trial. But that's spoilers. So let's continue. So she grew up in a very religious home, and they attended Central Congregational Church. When Lizzie was young, she was very involved in many different church activities like the Christian Endeavor Society, the contemporary social movement like the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and she was a member of the Ladies' Fruit and Flower Mission. So she was pretty involved in her religious worship, and she often did a lot of acts of service for other people in the community as well. So she practiced what she preached as far as, serving others in the community. Now, Lizzie and her sister actually would never marry and lived with their father when they were in their 30s. And again, at this point in history, this would have made them spinsters, and society kind of looked down on spinsters a little bit. Like, they weren't full members of society, I guess, because they weren't able to get married. And it's crazy to me because I didn't get married till I was 35, but I guess they lived with their parents. But women at this time had no way to actually get a job themselves. They could, but it was very, very rare for a woman to do that. So they were super dependent on their male relatives, so like fathers, brothers, spouses, for their survival and for their wealth, because they couldn't actually build it themselves. So that's why Lizzie and her sister Emma were very reliant upon their dad for their livelihood and for the money, and they felt entitled to his money. So that's important to note. Now, I want to go back to Lizzie's relationship with her stepmother for a minute. So Lizzie and her sister Emma really hated her so much that they often would refer to her as Mrs. Borden, or they would just call her Abby. They refused to call her their mother or acknowledge that she was their motherly figure, even though Lizzie had had her as a mother since she was about 3 or 4 years old. That's the only mother that they knew, but they often referred to her as Mrs. Borden instead of calling her mother or even just Abby. So I think they really felt threatened by Abby's presence. For some reason, it was a competition for their father's affection, and by having Abby there, he couldn't love them as much as she should because they were his blood and she was not. And this is just my guess. Needless to say, they really, really hated Abby. And anyone who knew the Borden family would actually say the family dynamic was a little strange. They got along, but there was always an underlying tension that you could sense. And this hatred is really important to note when we are talking about the wealth of the family. When I say Lizzie's father was a frugal man, I mean he was frugal, but he was mean about it. He was known to save old soup and serve it at strange times in the day just to make sure it all got used up. And he could have afforded a really nice home in the richer part of the city, which was up on the hill, which is where Lizzie and her sister Emma really wanted to live. But they lived on 92nd Street in the modest area of the city. So they could have lived in this nice fancy mansion with all the other rich people, but he chose not to live there. And that really bothered Lizzie. And I do want to point out that although he was super, super stingy, her father could actually be very generous with his money. He gave both of his daughters an allowance to make sure that they had plenty of money to buy themselves brand new dresses, and even purchased a summer home for the family to stay in. He even sent Emma to college for a year and a half, and then sent Lizzie, get this, Lizzie went on a 19-week trip around Europe with all expenses paid. So he wasn't that terrible of a father. And although their father provided for them well, it was never enough for Lizzie and Emma. Shockingly, these spoiled children felt entitled to more of their parents' mother. More. They felt entitled to his money. And apparently that's not a new thing. Apparently that's been going on for a while, because Lizzie and Emma felt very entitled to his money and felt like they should have more of a say of how he actually spent it. They wanted to participate in all the parties and throw their own parties and experience high society and art and show off their wealth a little bit. But their father disapproved of that kind of thing and believed in living just a normal, modest life. And Lizzie wasn't having it. She hated that so much because she wanted to show people that she was wealthy. But this became a really big source of contention among the family, especially when their father gifted a house to Abby's sister, who was in need. Her sister was struggling, and she was very, very close with this sister. And because Lizzie's father really cared about his wife and her family, he offered to buy Abby's sister a home and put it under Abby's name. Now, the two girls absolutely lost their mind when this happened. They could not believe that he would spend that much money on Abby's family, but wouldn't give them each their own house. They were just appalled and so upset. They complained that they deserved a new house and not their stepmother's sister. She should not have gotten it. So what he did is he actually sold them the home that they had lived in until their mother had passed away for $1. He charged them $1. And get this, they sold it back to him after a few weeks for $5,000. That is about $120,000 right now, almost $121,000. But that still was not enough for them. They truly felt that his wealth was being threatened by this other woman. Someone not of his blood was going to take this wealth away from him, and that he cared more about these other people who weren't his blood more than his own daughters. And Lizzie even said to a friend once that if something happened to her, or like happened to her father, she was convinced that she would get nothing from him. And I'm sorry, but they both really sound like spoiled brats to me. No wonder no one wanted to marry them. Like, they sound horrid. I'm not gonna lie. Like, yeah, she served the community, but the entitlement to her father's wealth, like thinking that she deserved it more than the stepmother, just wow. Wowdy, wow, wow, wow. So there was a disagreement that would take place in July of 1892 that really upset the sisters so much that they actually extended a vacation in New Bedford, which, by the way, their father was paying for. And once they returned to Fall River, a week before Abby Borden and Andrew Borden actually would be found dead. So they returned from this trip. Lizzie actually chose to stay in a local rooming house for 4 days before she would return to the residence because she was so upset at her father and Abby. Now, there's a story that a few weeks before the murder, there had been some pigeons nesting in their barn that Lizzie had really become attached to and formed a liking to. And she tried to set up this comfortable living space so they could, come and bring all their friends and just live happily in their barn. Well, a day or so later, she found that her father had actually hacked all the pigeons to death with a hatchet because he didn't want any of the neighbor children setting up camp in the barn to watch these pigeons. So he had killed all of them with a hatchet in the barn. So just keep that in mind as we continue telling this story. So on Tuesday, August 2nd, in 1892, Andrew and Abby were super sick. Probably due to some kind of food poisoning. Think about that old soup that he liked to hand out to people because he didn't want it to go bad. Yeah. So they were super, super sick. Lizzie got a little sick, but she didn't throw up. The two of them were throwing up quite a bit. But Lizzie and Maggie, the maid, which is what they actually called their maid, was Maggie. They didn't call her by her actual name. Interestingly enough, that was part of the we don't like Irish people thing. Anyways, Lizzie got a little sick, but Andrew and Abby got super sick. And I personally think this is significant, and this is why. The next day, after they had all been sick, Abby went to the doctor, and she told the doctor that she believed that she had actually been poisoned. And when the doctor went to check on everyone else, Lizzie would not talk to him. She just straight up went to her room. And Andrew, Lizzie's dad, just kind of pushed him out the door and was like, no, it's fine, it's fine. So there wasn't much that the doctor could do to verify Abby's claims. Oh, but wait, there is more. So Abby's suspicious that they've been poisoned. But there is more. Just wait for it. Or should I say, just wait for it. Any Psych fans out there? I know you guys gotta like Psych. Anyways, Ellie Bentz, who worked at Smith's Pharmacy, claimed that a woman fitting Lizzie's description had come into the store and had wanted to buy prussic acid, or what us normal people like to call cyanide. The woman claimed that she wanted it to put on the edges of her sealskin coat or cape. That part of the story changed. He couldn't remember if it was a coat or if it was a cape. And Lizzie actually did own a sealskin coat or cape. But this question, these inquiries into the cyanide was happening in the middle of August, remember? So people don't need coats, and they don't need to make improvements to their coats because it's August. And here in the United States, in August, it is hecka hot, and no one needs a coat. So this salesman said that he had refused the sale because no one used prussic acid in that way to put on the edges of a coat. That was just so strange to him. And the woman had gotten really upset and left in a, quote, haughty manner. And although the salesman said he didn't know the woman, he said that he would be able to recognize her if he saw her again. And when he was placed in an area where he could actually see Lizzie and hear Lizzie speaking, he automatically confirmed that she was the one who had tried to buy the cyanide. And two other workers who were actually present at the time of this incident also identified Lizzie as the woman who tried to buy the acid. So, a little suspicious. But wait, there's more. A few days before this incident, there was another pharmacy in town that had denied a woman the sale of the same exact thing. but they weren't able to describe her. So, 2 instances of a woman trying to get cyanide and being denied twice. Both seem to fit Lizzie's description. So, it's a little sus if you ask me. And then that night, so the same night that Abby had gone to the doctor and said, I think we might have been poisoned. That night, Lizzie actually went to one of her friends, Alice, and was hanging out with her and said to her, I'm afraid something bad will happen to my father and Abby. They've been very ill, and I suspect they have been poisoned. It could have come from the baker's bread or milk. And that's kind of what Abby had told the doctor, was that they thought that maybe the bread or the milk had been poisoned. She also said that her father had had some dealings with a man who had threatened to burn down his house. She had claimed that she heard angry words exchanged between the two of them. And I'm not sure if this was Lizzie actually expressing genuine concern for her family's safety, or was she just trying to set some doubt up in her friend's head because she knew what was going to happen the next day. I do find it really odd that she would kind of preemptively tell her friend, I think something's going to happen to my parents. Like, it's a little weird. So on Thursday, August 4th, 1892, it was just a normal morning for the Borden family. Emma was away on a trip to Fairhaven, so she actually wasn't in the home at the time. And Andrew's brother-in-law from his first marriage, so the brother of his first wife, John, oh man, I'm going to butcher his middle name. We know that's normal for me. Sinicum Morris had spent the night in the Borden home. So Lizzie, I forgot to mention this about when she was talking to her friend about the man. She had even claimed that she had seen this creepy man lurking around the house like a few nights throughout the week, and that their house had been broken into in the middle of the day. Forgot to mention that in some of the stuff that she was telling her friend Alice. Anyways, back to John staying the night. Now, it's believed that John had actually come to discuss business matters with Andrew, and people speculate that whatever the conversation was, it actually aggravated the situation in the home. Because remember, the girls are very anxious about the money, that they aren't going to get any money. And it's thought that John was there to discuss like selling some property, or there was some kind of exchange or something that was supposedly going to happen that would mean less money for the girls. So it would have aggravated the already tense situation in the home. So anyways, the brother-in-law had actually left early in the morning on August 4th, and he went to visit other relatives and did not return to the home until much later. And that was corroborated. He went and saw a niece and a nephew. The nephew wasn't home, but he spent quite a bit of time at the niece's house. So Andrew also had to leave early in the morning to get some work done for a couple of his businesses. So this would leave Maggie, the maid, Lizzie, and Abby the only people in the home at this time. So when Andrew returned home from his work at 11 a.m., he decided to take a nap on their couch in their front sitting room. At about 11:15 a.m., according to Lizzie's testimony, Lizzie found her father dead, having been repeatedly struck with some kind of sharp object. Now, I want to break down the timeline of that morning so we can actually really look at the details, so you can decide for yourself if you think Lizzie is innocent or if you think Lizzie is guilty. So, Abby told Maggie in the morning that while they were eating breakfast, that she wanted all the windows to be washed that day, both inside and out. So soon after cleaning up breakfast, which, by the way, while she was cleaning up breakfast, Maggie actually ended up throwing up outside because she was starting to feel sick. So it must have been the stomach flu running through the family or something. But she ended up throwing up while she was cleaning up breakfast. But after she cleaned up breakfast and did the dishes, Maggie would begin the work of cleaning the outside windows, including using a ladder. Like, she legit climbed up on a ladder to scrub all these second-story windows. And neighbors corroborated this story, which is important. Now, Lizzie didn't eat any of the breakfast that morning. She decided that she needed to iron her handkerchiefs instead. So, while Maggie was outside washing the windows, Lizzie actually popped her head out and checked with her, like, hey, so what are you up to today? Oh, you're washing windows? Do you want me to lock this back door? Or do you need me to leave it open so you can get in? And Maggie said it didn't really matter. She could do that either way, because she could also get into the house another way. Well, Lizzie left this side door unlocked, and this could have been a moment when an intruder could have technically snuck inside the house, because no one was really watching this door. So that could have potentially been a way for someone else to get into the house. But Lizzie claimed that she was working on ironing her handkerchiefs in the dining room, but was having a hard time ironing her handkerchiefs because the irons were not getting hot enough. Now, you got to remember, they don't have electricity. To heat up these irons, you have to actually put it on the stove and let it heat up that way. So she was trying to get it heated up on the stove. And she was just saying it wasn't working because it was just not getting hot enough. So while Maggie cleaned the kitchen and dining windows, she claimed that she had not seen anyone in those rooms. And this happened between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. It was during this time period, so between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., that Abby was actually killed in the guest bedroom that John Morris had stayed in the night before. She was hit on the right side of her face while she was facing her attacker, and then actually fell face down on the floor. And then her attacker continued to hit her on the back of the head with a hatchet 19 times. So this happened 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And the only people in the house at that time were Lizzie and Abby. Now, at 10:20, Maggie comes into the house and starts to wash the inside dining room windows, but doesn't see Lizzie anywhere. At 10:40, Andrew comes home from the errands he had to run for work, and Maggie actually helps him get through the front door since it was locked with 3 different bolts. He was having a hard time getting through the front door. And Maggie claims that while she was trying to unlock the door, she heard Lizzie laughing from upstairs. But Lizzie claimed that she was actually in the kitchen reading a magazine waiting for her irons to get hot when her father arrived home. But then Lizzie later changed her story and said she was actually upstairs repairing a garment when her father got home. But then the story changed again, and she claimed that she was just confusing all of these things because she was getting asked too many questions when she was being talked to by the police. So she changed her story a couple times, but she settled on, no, I was in the kitchen reading a magazine waiting for my iron to get hot. Well, between 9 a.m. and 10:40 a.m. is a pretty long time to be sitting around waiting for an iron to get hot, right? She did say that she did go upstairs, like eventually she said she went upstairs for a little bit to sew something onto a garment, but didn't hear anything. What? How is that even possible? And I'll explain why that is kind of a mind-blowing thing for me. It's because if you look at the layout of their home, so here's your context. Lizzie's bedroom was actually right next to the guest room where Abby would have been killed. She would have been able to see anybody coming and going from that room because there was only one stairwell, which is so confusing. They've got like 2 different stairwells, and it goes up to 2 different parts of the upstairs, and you can't get to the other part of the upstairs without going up the stairs. It was very confusing. Anyways, so this guest room is literally right next to her room, and she could see anyone coming and going from that room. And not to mention, she said she didn't hear anything. She is literally right next to that room. How could you not hear anything? Like, the proximity made it almost impossible to not hear anything if something happened in the room. Like, just the thud of her stepmother falling on the ground should have been like, huh, what was that? I should go investigate. But she claims to have heard nothing. And that is just mind-blowing to me. Like, I do not understand that unless she is lying, which we'll find out. I'm going to give you all the clues, and then I'll tell you my belief in what happened. So, they even asked Lizzie what she thought Abby had been doing upstairs for so long. And Lizzie said, oh, I don't know. Maybe she was using the sewing machine. And so the police asked her, well, did you hear the sewing machine? And Lizzie was like, well, no. So it just seems a little sus, if you ask me. Anyways, back to the timeline. When Lizzie came down the stairs, she went into the sitting room and asked her father if she had any mail. And it was at this moment in time that she told her father that Abby had gotten a note and was out visiting a friend. So, if she said that, and also said that maybe Abby was upstairs sewing on a sewing machine, did she really think Abby was out visiting a friend? That is the question. Now, Maggie actually had come in the house. She had finished doing the outside windows at this point and was working on the dining room windows when Lizzie claimed that she helped her father take off his jacket and she helped him take off his shoes to put some slippers on his feet. Spoiler, if you look at the murder photo, which is horrific, by the way, I don't recommend it, but I might put it on my Instagram. You never know. Anyways, in the photo of his body, he is not wearing slippers. He is wearing his normal shoes and a jacket with another jacket shoved behind his head, which we will mention a little bit later. And she said that she had left her father laying down on the couch for a nap with his slippers and the removal of his jacket, which isn't confirmed in the photo where he's dead. Anyways, Lizzie then asked Maggie if she had any plans to go out since Abby was now out for the day and Lizzie was planning on going out at some point, so Maggie should just go out. She even said, Maggie, there's a cloth sale going on. You should go check that out. But Maggie said, I'm actually not feeling well. Like I said, she threw up at breakfast and was still able to power through cleaning all the windows. She's like, you know what? I'm probably just going to go rest for the rest of the day because I am not feeling well. Well, when Lizzie heard that, she was like, oh, okay, well, I need to finish ironing my handkerchiefs. So she got the ironing board out again, put it in the dining room, and continued to try and figure out how to iron her handkerchiefs. At 10:55 a.m., Maggie goes upstairs to lay down. Lizzie said that at this time, she left her father laying on the couch, and she went into the kitchen and then out into the yard where she picked 3 pears from their pear tree and went into the barn. She said she went upstairs in the barn to eat her pears and look for lead sinkers, so the things you attach to a fishing rod or a fishing line, and she was looking for those for an upcoming fishing trip. Now, this is not the story she told a friend on the day of the murder. She told her friend that she went in the barn to get things to fix a broken window screen. She told her neighbor that she was in the barn looking for a piece of iron, but didn't say what she needed it for. So the finishing story the one before about looking for the sinkers, that only came about during her inquest with the police. And the police did find a box of lead 3 feet from the door on the ground floor in the barn. So maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe she was genuinely looking for it. Or maybe she knew that was in the barn. So she made up a story that people would believe because she knew that was already in there. The police actually found no evidence that she had actually been on the second floor of the barn because there were no footprints in the dust other than her father's, who had been there earlier in the day. So there was no proof that she actually had been up in the second floor of the barn like she claimed. Now, Lizzie said that when she returned to the house, the screen door was open, so trying to make it sound like someone snuck in, which someone possibly could have. And Maggie said that she had only been in her room for about 10 to 15 minutes before she heard Lizzie calling to her, saying, "Come down quick, father's dead, someone came in and killed him." And I think that's an interesting thing to say when you stumble upon your father's body, is someone came in and killed him. Like, she wanted to be clear that it wasn't her. Like, I found someone had killed him. Like, I don't know. It just seems a little suspicious to me. So Maggie came down as quickly as she could, and Lizzie immediately told her to go get Dr. Bowen, the doctor that had actually helped her mother or her stepmother when she thought she had been poisoned. So it's the same doctor. And when Maggie got to his house, she found out that he was not home. So Lizzie told her that she needed to go get her friend Alice because Lizzie didn't want to be in the home alone while they tried to find a doctor. P.S. There was Irish doctors close by, like almost next door to them, but Lizzie would not have asked for any of their help because he was Irish. So, side note there. But Maggie would leave again, leaving Lizzie alone in the house. You know, she didn't want to be alone in the house, but there she was, alone in the house. Her other neighbor actually noticed Lizzie looking pretty distressed standing by the back screen door. And so she called out and asked what was wrong. And she responded, "My father is dead." So the neighbor went and looked for a doctor for Lizzie as well. Now, when Maggie reached Alice and told her of Andrew's death, Alice automatically thinks that it had to have been poison, since Lizzie had already said something about that the night before. And at 11:15 a.m., the police are notified of the brutal murder of Andrew, so they head to the Borden home. They don't arrive for quite a while, by the way. So Dr. Bowen actually arrived at the house at 11:20, so about 5 minutes after the police were notified. And Lizzie informed him that she was afraid her father had been stabbed. So Dr. Bowen sees Andrew as no longer recognizable, and I won't go into the gory details about his injuries, but some key facial features were chopped up, so you couldn't really recognize them. And he confirmed that Andrew was indeed dead, and he had actually been hit by the hatchet 10 to 11 times. When Alice arrived, she asked Lizzie where she was when this all happened, and she told the story about fixing the window. Then Lizzie says, someone needs to find Mrs. Borden. Remember, she does not call her mother or Abby. She calls her Mrs. Borden. She says, someone needs to find Mrs. Borden. And that's when Alice and the neighbor go upstairs and find Abby's body in the guest room. And unlike Andrew's body that was still actually seeping blood and warm to the touch, Abby had dried blood around her and was deathly cold. So it was very clear that she had been dead a while before they found her body. Now, when the police finally arrive, they started an investigation. They started looking around, but there were people coming in and out of that house. There were neighbors, and like there was no crime scene protection at all. It was just like photographers and news reporters and just everyone and everything was in there like walking around. And Lizzie was saying that she didn't feel well, so she locked herself in her bedroom basically for the rest of the day. So they actually were the ones, so the police were the ones to believe that they had been attacked with a hatchet. And Lizzie told them it could have been an angry man that her father had refused to do business with. That was her immediate, like, it must have been this man that did not do business with my father. Interestingly, if Lizzie had committed the murders, she would have been covered in blood. If you are a true crime fan, you know about blood splatter, you know about all of that, those details. But these murder scenes and Lizzie were interesting because she had no blood on her anywhere. They found a little bit on her inner skirt that she claimed was from a flea bite, but there was none anywhere on the outside of her dress. But the scene was also a little interesting because most of the blood was right next to the victim. There was very little blood splatter patterns, which they found a couple, but not nearly as many as you would suspect for the brutality of the murder that took place. Most of the blood was right next to the victims. And one theory, so remember that extra coat I mentioned that was tucked behind her father's head? Well, one theory is that Lizzie had actually used her father's coat to protect herself from getting the blood on her and then put it behind his head so it looked like that's where the blood came from. Now, her father was very proud of this possession. He would have never left it like bunched up anywhere. He would have always hung it up. So the theory is if she wore this coat backwards, the only thing that would have gotten bloody would have been her face and her hands. And it makes no sense that it was balled up behind his head because, like I said, it was a prized possession. He always hung it up. So some people really think that's what happened, is Lizzie actually used that as kind of like a cover to commit the murder. But what about Abby's murder? Shouldn't she have blood from that? Well, I feel like Lizzie actually would have had plenty of time to change out of bloody clothes for that one. Because like I said, it happened between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. And Maggie was outside cleaning windows. She wouldn't have seen anything. And it turns out that actually a few days after the police started investigating, that her and her sister actually burned a dress. And she claimed it was covered in paint and she could no longer use it. But there's no stories of her painting anything recently. And this was not a common way to dispose of a dress that was quote unquote covered in paint. So it's kind of suspicious. It makes it seem like it was more covered in blood than paint. And the police actually didn't do a thorough investigation of Abby's room, or not Abby's room, sorry, Lizzie's room, because Lizzie claimed to not be feeling well after the discovery of her parents. And so, like I said, she locked herself in her bedroom and the police just kind of did a cursory search, like they didn't go in depth at all. So she could have easily hidden that dress in her bedroom, not to mention any other incriminating evidence could have been hidden in that room. So the police also found a pail of water with multiple bloody towels inside of this pail of water down in their cellar. And later they would actually find the head of a hatchet in a chest containing tools. The head of the hatchet seemed to be covered in ash from a fire, and the handle had been freshly broken off. And the hatchet actually had the rusting consistency of a hatchet either being left outside overnight or soaking in water to get it cleaned off. And if this was a murder weapon, they would have wanted to break off the handle because blood wouldn't have come out of the wood because it would have absorbed it. But with the hatchet, they put it in this old chest with really old tools and probably used that ash to make it look like it was older than it actually was. And the blade of the hatchet was actually 3 to 5 inches long. And that's about the same length as most of the wounds on Abby and Andrew. So this really made the police suspect that they had found the murder weapon. And Lizzie's story about those bloody towels, well, she claimed she was on her monthly cycle and that they had actually been there for a few days. Well, Maggie had a little bit of a problem with that story because she said that she had never seen them. They must have appeared that day because they had not been there. And if they had been there, she would have actually washed them with the rest of their washing. She wouldn't have just left them there. So Maggie's story contradicted Lizzie's in that they hadn't been there for days. They appeared that day. Now, Lizzie acted pretty excited and in a hurry the day of the murders. She wasn't crying hardly at all. She stayed pretty calm and showed no signs of sorrow and no expression of wanting to actually find the perpetrator of the crime. Her friend Alice described Lizzie as dazed, and most likely, if she had not committed these murders, she was probably in shock. I mean, I think anyone, even if she had, could have been in shock at this point in time. And one thing to really keep in mind when we're talking about the answers to the questions and how she gave different answers and those kinds of things, her doctor actually had her on double doses of morphine from the moment her parents were killed all through her stay in jail. And so her memories, like those doses of morphine, probably messed with those memories and messed with her responses. I've had to be on morphine for things before, and it can mess with your mind. I tell you what, I've got funny stories about that. I'm sure my mom would appreciate it because she was the one at the doctor's office with me. But anyways, so morphine probably messed with her answers, but still. So the injuries sustained by Abby and Andrew were very personal. And like I said, if you've listened to true crime, if you like true crime, you know a personal attack when you see it because it is thorough, it is aggressive. Like if it's a random stranger that's killing you, they're not going to waste their time by hitting you 13 times with a hatchet. That is someone who is angry at you, and this is personal. So that is why the police really suspected that it was actually Lizzie that had done this. So Lizzie was arrested on August 11th, 1892 for the murder of her father and stepmother. When the police interviewed her, most of them did not like her attitude. She seemed uncaring and dismissive as to what was happening. Her stories of the events changed all the time about the murder. And the police had claimed, like I said, that they had searched her bedroom. But like I said, they did not do a thorough job of that and actually got in big trouble for the shoddy behavior on this case, for everything. Like I said, this murder scene was like open, come buy tickets, everybody come see it. Like it was ridiculous. Their investigation was horrible. But in June of 1983, almost a year later, by the way, she had been in prison this whole time, she would stand trial for the murders of her stepmother and her father. At her trial, the prosecution brought out the evidence against Lizzie, some of which included, get this, her parents' actual skulls. I'm not even joking. The prosecution used her parents' skulls as evidence. When Lizzie saw her parents' skulls sitting there, she fainted, which I'm not going to lie, I would too, no matter what. Like it showed all the fractures and the brutal, brutal attack on their skulls. So I actually watched, this was really fun. There's a 48 hours episode out there that I highly recommend that you watch where they basically do a retrial of Lizzie, and it's in front of people who have never ever heard of her story. So they're the jury, and then you've got a prosecutor and a defender, and they present only the evidence that was presented at the Lizzie Borden trial, the real trial, to see how people would react and if they would prosecute her or not. The reason why they tried this was because at this point in history, women were so innocent. There's no way a woman could ever possibly commit any kind of murder. So her arrest had sparked public uproar. People were furious because there is no possible way a woman could commit this crime. And the jury on the 48 Hours episode, all but 2 people found her to be guilty. And the only reason why the other 2 people said not guilty was because they were like, well, I can't say without a reasonable doubt. Everyone else said she was guilty. Well, what did the real jury in Lizzie's case say? Well, it was a jury of all men that did not think women were strong enough to wield a hatchet in any kind of way that would be brutal enough to kill someone, and didn't think women were capable of killing. So, obviously, they found her innocent. She was found innocent of the murder. Now, being an upper class woman also helped quite a bit because, again, it was one of those, well, she's upper class. She is above those kinds of things. There's no way anyone of our class could do this, especially not a woman. Women are not capable of that kind of thing. So that really played into her benefit as far as getting acquitted from this case. Now, to try and escape her tainted name after she was found innocent, Lizzie changed her name to Lizbeth. 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 I know it sounds a little weird because you want to say Elizabeth, but it's Lizbeth. And it didn't work. Society knew exactly who she was. She never moved away from Fall River. Emma and Lizzie actually continued living together in a house up on the hill. You know, they finally got what they wanted. They finally got their father's wealth in the hill house and all the wealth. But now she was kind of disowned by the town, by the city. A lot of people thought she was guilty and got away with murder. So no one would come and talk to her. Like, she was really thought to be guilty and got away with murder. And the children in the town often stopped and did that nursery rhyme that I read at the beginning of this. They would throw rotten eggs at her house, and they just basically disowned her from society. In later years, Lizzie and Emma actually would have a falling out, and Emma would leave and move away and never speak to Lizzie again. But what was the falling out over? We may never know. But some speculate that Lizzie finally admitted to her guilt to her sister. And, you know, that is a pretty likely scenario if she is guilty. But there are other theories that Lizzie was having a lesbian relationship that her sister did not approve of. So there's 2 different theories as to why they had a falling out. But like I said, we will never know. No one actually knew why they had a falling out. So Lizzie actually died of pneumonia on June 1st, 1927, at the age of 66. She had very few people attend her funeral, and both her and her sister, never being married, were buried next to their parents, including their stepmother, in Oak Grove Cemetery. Now, at the time of her death, Lizzie was worth over $250,000. In today's money, that's about $5,884,000. So she was rolling in the dough. You know, she got what she wanted. She got her dad's wealth. Now, you can actually stay in the Borden house now, It's a museum and a bed and breakfast. And some people believe this house is haunted. So if you're brave, I dare you to stay in that house. And if you do, I want to hear about it. Tell me what happens. Is it spooky? It looks spooky. I don't ever want to stay there. It looks really creepy. But if you do, let me know. So what do you think? I want to know. Do you think Lizzie is innocent? Is she being framed? Did someone sneak into the house? She claims the door was open. Someone could have gotten in there. Me, personally, she is 1000% guilty. She absolutely killed her parents. She had motive. She had time to do it. It sounds premeditated because it sounds like she was going to try and poison them. And when that failed, she was like, well, I guess we'll do what he did to my pigeons. Like, I've listened to so much true crime to believe that some random person snuck into this house, killed those two hours apart from each other, just for the heck of it. What'd they do? Sneak in and then hide in a closet and wait, but didn't kill the other two people in the household because they're innocent bystanders. I'm just going to kill these two people, even though that motive from Lizzie was pretty darn strong. It was Lizzie. It was for sure Lizzie. Guilty. That's what I think. And it was for sure premeditated because she was a spoiled brat that felt entitled to her dad's money. But that's just my opinion. I want to hear your opinion about this. So next week on HHH, we are going to talk about another mighty Roman emperor, Tiberius. And I've mentioned him a little bit in a previous episode, but this is a special request that I received from my most favorite listener of all time, my sweet, amazing producer of a husband, Tony. He has wanted me to do this because we are actually going to Rome and we will see where Tiberius lived. So we are going to get an up close and personal look at Tiberius's stomping grounds. And you got a taste of his horribleness in the episode about Caligula. So we're actually going to dive a lot deeper into Tiberius's story and talk about all the evil things he did that made him a horrible human in history. Just like Lizzie Borden, our horrible human in history of the week. So be sure you're liking, subscribing, and sharing this with everyone. And if you have any recommendations for me of people that you want to hear about, be sure to comment on this episode or send me a message in my Instagram account. It's just Horrible Humans in History. So I want to hear from you guys. Is she guilty? Is she not guilty? I want to know. So we will see you guys next week. We'll be talking about Tiberius. You guys have a fabulous week. See you later.